Hello there, welcome to this introduction video on using Fluid Designer for 3D printing. In this video we're going to explain what Fluid Designer is, how there is the Blender engine at the background of Fluid Designer, which gives you a lot of additional functionality, and we're going to explain how we've incorporated some learning materials into Fluid Designer for 3D printing, and we're going to explain some of the 3D printing tools, the additional tools that we've added to the Blender engine to make it easier for you to create 3D printable objects. First thing I ought to explain is Fluid Designer for 3D printing is completely free of charge because it's based upon Blender, which is open source software. So if you go to our website at fluiddesigner.co.uk, you can download the software for free and install it on your system. If you do that, your opening screen should look something like this one here. And the feature of Fluid Designer that makes it different from Blender is this interface here. And this interface, this drag and drop interface, has been created by a company called Microvellum, and it simplifies the Blender engine. I'll show you a little bit of Blender later on, but we would advise, if you're new to 3D printing, we would advise you stick to this interface and use the drag and drop features and some of the tools that we've added. So one of the things that we've added is a learning projects folder, and within the learning projects folder we've added a number of different subfolders, so ceramic and porcelain projects and bracelets and earrings and pendants, etc. And within each one of these you will find a range of objects that you can just drag and drop onto the workspace. You will find that when you do that, there's a help panel opens up in the left hand side here, and you will get instructions on how you can modify this object here to create this finished printable bracelet in this case. And one of the things that is really powerful in Fluid Designer is this link between this object at the left here, this black line, which is what's called a Bezier curve, and what we've done is we've linked it to a Bezier circle to give you this object in the middle here, and you can manipulate this object and resize it very easily in Fluid Designer just by dragging the control points. So you can drag the control points and resize the object very quickly and recreate, in this instance, an arm bangle. It's not quite same size as that, but play around a little bit more. So we've linked up this Bezier curve to the Bezier circle so that you don't actually have to do that. You don't have to worry about that. You can just play around, and here you can create an object. Now at the moment this grey object is still what's called a curve, and you can't print curves, so what you always need to do is to convert it into a mesh, and you'll see it changes colour. Now in the background of Fluid Designer is Blender, and Blender has a lot of modifiers, and so if we look at this object here at the moment, it's just a thin skin, a thin shell. You can't print that, but there's a lot of modifiers built into Blender and built into Fluid Designer, so we can use a modifier called a solidify modifier, and if we apply some thickness to this object, so if I just change the thickness, you'll see it changing here, so I can make it a couple of millimeters thick, and that object now can be printed. So very quickly and very easily we can create a simple bracelet which can be printed. And so we've done that using a lesson in this instance. Now, so within learning projects there are a whole series of lessons teaching you about different objects that you can create and giving you some ideas and introducing you to using Fluid Designer. Now one of the nice things about Fluid Designer is that this menu system here allows you to save your projects. You can save your projects not in learning projects but under My Projects. So you can create folders in Fluid Designer and you can save your projects there. So if I go to one of the designs that I created and drag and drop that onto the workspace, if I just move the panel out of the way here, and move this panel out of the way, this is an object that I've created in Fluid Designer using the similar method to what I've just shown you there. and this is a bracelet, and it's a bracelet that's actually available on the internet for sale. So one of the things that we do is, after we've created our objects, we go to Shapeways on the internet, where you can upload your designs and you can sell them through a shop. So this is an example of the of this particular object that we've created in Fluid Designer. This is the finished object, available in silver. Now what we've incorporated in addition in Fluid Designer, as well as this learning projects folder, and as well as the ability using Microvellum's drag and drop technology to save your projects, we've also incorporated some template files in Fluid Designer. And we've incorporated a number of different templates, some NURB circles. If you go to the learning projects folder and you go to pendants, there are some lessons there on NURB circles, creating NURB circles in terms of creating pendants, to give you some ideas of how to use NURB circles. There are some skin modifiers as well, and again in the lessons there are some lessons on skin modifiers and giving you some ideas of what you can do with that. But I think one of the most important tools are the cross-section tools that we've created. And so what we've done is we've set up some objects here which you can just drag and drop onto the workspace. So for example, if we just drag and drop number 4 here, which is a square cross-section, what we've done is we've linked this Bezier curve on the left here to the Bezier circle, so that you can modify it and come up with objects, printable objects that suit the design specification that you want. But instead of this object being round, you'll notice that if I just zoom around there, this object is in fact a square. This cross-section is a square. And within these template files here, we've created some other objects that are pentagon shapes, a hexagon, octagon and decagon. So you can create a really wide variety of objects from Fluid Designer using these template files. And to give you an idea of some of the objects that we've created using those template files, this object for example, and this bracelet which we just showed you a second ago, and this ring, and these chess pieces, this vase, this triangular vase, ceramic vase there, this napkin ring, and these bracelets and rings, these are pen holders, all of potpourri vase, all of these objects have actually been created in Fluid Designer using these template files. Now in all honesty, we didn't use the template files themselves, because what we've done is we've in addition to the template files, and you do need to be careful with those that you don't do file and save if you open up template files. Always go to file and save as. As well as the template files, there's also a parts category here, and in the parts category we've also added some cross-section files, and these files are also different cross-sections, triangular and square and pentagon. Now these are for the more advanced users. We would recommend you work through the lessons first before you start trying to use these objects. But these objects are also made up of a Bezier curve at the side here, linked to a Bezier circle, and here you can just see the wireframe mode of the object. But these are the tools that we use to create the finished objects. These objects here were all created using the parts category cross-section files. And the thing about these is you can create them and modify them using tools, the modifiers that are built into Fluid Designer, and come up with all sorts of weird and wonderful and interesting objects. So you don't have to just start off with a triangular cross-section. There's a whole range of cross-sections available to you there. So you can just use a circular cross-section, for example. But drag and drop these objects onto the workspace, just select the Bezier curve on the left, and then you can modify it. And so these are some features, some tools that we've added to Fluid Designer that were not originally there. Okay, so let me see, what do I want to say next? Well, behind Fluid Designer, as I probably mentioned at the beginning, is the Blender engine. So you can go to File and load the Blender interface. If you do that, you'll get this kind of screen will open up. Now Blender is a really powerful tool, and it's right in the background of Fluid Designer, so in addition to be able to create 3D printable objects, you can do an awful lot more with Fluid Designer for 3D printing. If you go onto the internet, there's a really smart tutorial on the internet there on Blender tutorial. Behind Fluid Designer is Blender, so if you Google Blender and Bezier curves, that's what I've just been showing you, Bezier curves. Here's a really interesting video on the internet, and this is a guy who uses Blender's behind Fluid Designer for creating games. So in this instance he's created a video game, a pool game. Okay, so that's one of the other things that you can do with Fluid Designer. Now when I first came across Fluid Designer, this is the video that really brought me to Fluid Designer. The people who built Fluid Designer interface are the company called Microvellum, and I'll just briefly show you 20 or 30 seconds of one of their videos, and this is what brought me to Fluid Designer.
In this video, I would like to give a demonstration on the parametric modeling features I've been working on. These features allow us to create parametric smart objects that can be used to design a room, create renderings, and even make animations as you see here. In this demonstration, we will be using this furniture smart object to create a collection of different furniture pieces, which I will then use to create a rendering of an interior scene.
Okay, so that's the video that brought me to Fluid Designer, and I'll say the company Microvellum created that video and that interesting animation. And so within Blender itself there are tools to create animations, and there are also tools to create rendered images. So this image here, for example, it's not a photograph, it's a rendered image that's created in Fluid Designer, as is this one and this one. And we've left you the tools within Fluid Designer to actually do that. So if you go to My Projects, and if you go down to the folder, the Projects folder at the very bottom, and this is distributed with Fluid Designer. If you drag and drop this object here, the home Blender file, onto the workspace, take a few seconds to open up. This object here shows some items that were created by Microvellum, and this table here is the table that features on these rendered images. So I've created these objects in Fluid Designer and then created these photorealistic images using the Blender Cycles engine, which is in the background of Fluid Designer. And so that's one of the other features in Fluid Designer which, you know, for the more advanced user we think is really useful. So that's left there for you. So it's not just for beginners, is Fluid Designer. The drag and drop feature we think is really good for beginners. The simplified interface we think is really good for beginners, but you're not limited to that. You can just switch over here to the Blender interface, and those of you who are familiar with Blender, all your Blender menus are here. Okay, so for the advanced user you can switch to those. For beginners we however recommend that you stick with the Fluid Designer interface, which we think is a little bit simpler and plenty good enough for 3D printable objects. Now one final thing we'd like to say is that Fluid Designer and Blender don't make an absolutely perfect job of creating meshes. Often when you create something in Fluid Designer, so for example an object like this one here, this pendant, this happy face pendant, what you'll find in Fluid Designer is that there are holes in the edge of this because of the way it's created using the Blender tools. But what we always recommend is that any object that you create in Fluid Designer, you always export it as a STL or an OBJ file, and always import it to a mesh repair tool called Netfabb Basic. And Netfabb Basic will fix any problems that Fluid Designer gives you. Okay, so Netfabb Basic is a piece of software that's available free on the internet. You can download it from the internet for free, install it on your system, so any meshes you create in Fluid Designer, just export them to Netfabb Basic and run them through mesh analysis there, and you'll have some really interesting objects objects like this which you can get printed. So can I just remind you again, Fluid Designer for 3D printing is available for free at fluiddesigner.co.uk. Okay, so that's the end of this video. Thank you.